I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say that here at the 8th World Syriac Conference in Korea, we have missed the presence of our friend and colleague Alain Desreumaux. And you may also, like me, have been intrigued by the enticing title he proposed for his paper in the program, Syriac, a Worldwide Traveling Culture. Fortunately for us, Alain sent his text to Father Jacob some few days ago. But since his text is written in French, Father Jacob thought it might be more convenient, given the international nature of our group, to give Alain's paper in English, which explains my presence here. Many of you are already familiar with the sophisticated literary style of Alain's written prose in French. So for this reason, and also for reasons of time, I will give you only a brief resume of Alain's paper. I apologize in advance for the inevitable vulgar simplifications that I have introduced, but I have no doubt that a fully developed textual version will appear in a subsequent issue of The Heart. The title is Regional Manifestations of the Syriac Communities in the World, Some Historical Reflections for Today. His paper is divided into 3 parts. After an introduction, come 2 sections entitled respectively, On the Attachment of Syriac Christians to the Quest for Origins, and the Presence of Syriac Christians in Other Cultural Worlds. I'll begin with the introduction, and I've translated the first few paragraphs literally. When we hear people today speak about the churches of Syriac communities, whether they be those persecuted and ravaged by war in the Near and Middle East, or those which emigrated to Europe, North America, or Australia, the wider public is generally quite ignorant of what the term Syriac means, of what the Syriac language is, and of what Syriac liturgies are. As for the presence and importance of Syriac Christian communities in Kerala, in southern India, most of my fellow French citizens, and no doubt also other Europeans, North Americans and so forth, are often quite surprised to learn of their very existence. Sometimes they have trouble believing, trouble associating coconut trees, elephants, backwaters, and Syriac churches. The latter, by the way, and as you know, are almost never part of the commercial tourism circuits. In the remaining parts of his introduction, Alain goes on to explore some of the consequences of this widespread ignorance of history and geography, including the tendency to confuse language, religion, culture, nationality, and even architecture. Citing examples from his hometown of Sarcelles, outside of Paris, he recounts hearing a number of residents refer to the Martoma Chaldean Catholic Church as a mosque, despite the presence of 3 large crosses on its domes, because its architecture recalls that of Iraq. Alain relates several other anecdotes, all of them dealing with people in modern societies, in France for example, who are asking questions, who are uncertain even about their own identities, and in which some members feel threatened by the presence of different religious groups, as if their very presence threatens the stability of a prevailing social order which equates nation with religious tradition. Such feelings may be found in many countries and regions, of course, not only in Europe, but also in the Middle East and in India, for example, and all too often, these become a source of serious social and political conflict. Such situations also provoke the question of a given people's consciousness of their own identity. La conscience identitaire d'un peuple is the phrase that Alain uses, and of the place of religious expression within such a consciousness. Here, in the context of the Syriac churches, the problem is approached through 2 perspectives. First, through a look at how the Syriac church is rooted to the land of its birth, attempting to highlight specifically what Syriac Christianity owes not only to its Aramean heritage, but also to the very territory of its origin. Secondly, Alain provides a survey of those particular traits that Syriac Christianity acquired as it traveled throughout other regions of the world through which it passed, where it diffused and implanted itself. The contemporary context, be it peaceful or tragic depending on the region in question, compels us as historians, and for a certain number of us as theologians, to examine closely how the Syriac Christians' consciousness of their own identity has expressed itself throughout the history of the Syriac communities. These communities are not uniform, of course, and the societies in which they have lived and live today are extremely diverse. It's thus necessary to ask what specific regional manifestations they have developed. And these kinds of questions include the question of why the Syriac Church survived in some regions of its historical passage, but not in others, why it thrives today in certain modern societies of the Orient, but is a forgotten chapter of ancient history in others. And Seri in Kerala is certainly a privileged place for such studies and debates. Part 2 deals with the Syriac Christians' interest in their own origins. When the first inscriptions in Edessan Aramaic were being engraved in northern Syria and around Edessa at the end of the 1st century of the Christian era, no one could possibly have imagined that the written heritage of that language would spread and endure with very good reasons of success into the 14th century in China and Central Asia, and into the 21st century in Kerala. That on the 5 continents, heirs of the Syriac traditions would be reading and singing the Bible and the Church Fathers in this language lauded by so many writers. On the subject of cultural continuity, I now paraphrase and abridge Alain's texts, and as I said earlier, for the richer, fuller text will have to await publication. He begins with a survey of the non-Christian dialects of Aramaic of the Hellenistic and Roman period. Mention is made of Nabatean, of Palmyrene, but also of isolated Aramaic inscriptions from southern Syria and even from northern India. He explores how, with the success of Hellenism, Aramaic in many regions, with the exception of Jewish Aramaic, was apparently no longer viable as a durable vehicle of cultural expression, and of how these other contemporary pagan Aramaic traditions, although they left spectacular and beautiful monuments, generally did not survive Hellenism in the Roman period, with the exception of Edessa. Alain then discusses the roots of Edessene Syriac culture, as it is known through early Syriac inscriptions from around the area of Edessa, from the end of the 1st century to the mid-3rd century, but also through literary texts, and especially the doctrine of Adar, redacted around the year 400. He concludes that classical Syriac was thus born into the cradle of Edessa as a vehicle for expressing the Christian political thought of writers like Bardaitson, and also for Bible translations, early Bible translations, since the doctrine of Adar implies their existence. He also explores the beginnings of the Syriac scripts and of how-to scripts, as Stronghello and Serto had their origins in Edessene Aramaic script in its various forms, monumental and cursive. For each of these topics, Alain provides, where possible, recent and comprehensive bibliography, paying special attention to synthetic and global treatments, but he also adds his own insights. For example, at the end of his development on Edessa, he notes the irony that though it be fundamental for the foundation of the Syriac Church, the doctrine of Adai is almost never mentioned by subsequent Syriac writers. Speculating on the reasons for this, Alain proposes that with the Christianization of the empire, Syriac Christianity had at that time, and in that cultural context, no real reason to look for ancestors. It was part of the empire, embedded within the life of its region. In the following sections, he goes on to explore the Syriac communities of late antiquity, especially as they're documented archaeologically in northern Syria, in the so-called dead cities of the Mansif Kalker, near modern Idlib, but also around Tur-Abdin to the northeast. After that, he treats the following historical periods, which he sees as characterized by an interest on the part of Syriac authors of reconstructing myths of their own ethnic origins. He cites as a catalyst for this development the onset of the Islamic period and the concomitant transfer of regional political power to non-Christian populations. He also devotes several paragraphs to the 12th and 13th centuries, to chroniclers such as Michael the Syrian, who also show a special interest in emphasizing a common historical ethnicity, our Aramean race, a development for which Alain sees unfortunate consequences in the form of the persistence of nationalist sentiments, in which terms like Arab and Christian are used as if they were opposing categories. Having treated the various means by which Syriac Christian communities reconciled themselves with their own past, Alain moves on to a third and final section, in which he takes a look at how Syriac Christianity spread outside the land of its birth into other cultural worlds. He treats, of course, Central Asia, Mongolia, and China, and in passing, reminds us that these very areas will be the subject of the next annual roundtable, organized this coming November in Paris by the Société d'études Syriaques. But as you can imagine, in a context such as this one, he ends with the Syriac Christians of Kerala. After mentioning his work with Father Jacob Tekeparaki and Father Thomas Kunamaka on the historical architecture of the churches of the St. Thomas Christians of Kerala, which appeared in the last published volume of the series Etudes Syriaques, Alain addresses, as he must, and has often been done over the past several days, the theme of internal divisions within the Keralese churches, and of the historical reasons for this. He agrees that Joseph Fedafil is probably right in recognizing foreign influences from Europe, but also from the Middle East, as being fundamental contributing factors in exacerbating these divisions. But beyond this, Alain is also interested in the richness and in the fully Keralese expression of Syriac Christianity, which he notes as a paradox that neither external influences nor internal divisions were able to hinder. He ends by citing Father Guibardis Paniker's article on how St. Thomas Christians are an integral part of and fully embedded in what he called Hindu Malabar culture. And Alain sees the most tangible, the most accessible and concrete example of this perfect participation, as he calls it, in the frequent presence of elephants and peacocks on the facades of Keralese churches, and in the beauty and elegance of the Keralese Syriac script, decorated with the grace of Malayalam.
Thank you very much. I think we cannot ask Alain, because he's not here. So we come for the next short speech. The judge, Justin Alexander Thomas, please come forward. You are the judge at the High Court of Kerala, and you will speak some words on the issue of Syriac studies. Thank you. 10 minutes, please. Keep it up.
Dr. Crown, Father Jacob, and all the Syriac scholars who gathered here for the 8th World Syriac Conference 2014, and my dear brothers and sisters. I've been quite unexpectedly allotted time by Father Jacob to replace Mother Gray for this time slot. So I've really not been prepared, neither I'm a scholar in Syriac studies, and probably the only two laymen who have consecutively participated in this conference for the last 3 or 4 days among laymen would be Ambassador Fabian and probably myself. Before becoming a judge, I was a lawyer, so as you know, a lawyer is expected to be a little bit clever. So, in the vision of you scholars, I might take the liberty of taking insurance to indemnify myself from you scholars, because the topic given to me by the Father Jacob is the future of Syriac studies. So I have been intelligently recoined as a layman's perspective of the future of Syriac studies. I would really intend to share a small thoughts from the perspective of a layman. You are sitting in the small town of Kottayam, and where you had a vice chancellor in the first university established in India after the name of the father of the nation, namely Mahatma Gandhi University, and the vice chancellor was a scholar from a person from Karnataka, was a scholar from Birmingham University. He was basically a professor of English literature, and his name, as most of you may not know, is Alain Desreumaux. He was mainly in English literature, and he had wandered like a wandering Aramaic into other fields like Kannada literature and politics, metaphysics, spirituality, and you name it, and he was that. And he just passed away on the 22nd of August, if I remember rightly, just about 3 weeks back. And he used to say quite often that if one is displaced from one's mother tongue, you are uprooted. Such people are an uprooted people. You are a displaced people from your own culture and civilization. And he gave a lot of emphasis for ensuring that the medium of education in any country should be initially in the mother tongue, and then probably in an internationally well-known connecting language like English or etc. And he used to repeatedly come up with this concept that to remove this uprooting, one should go back to the mother tongue. And the mother tongue of the church certainly would be the tongue spoken by the mother of Ishwa, and it should certainly be Aramaic or Syriac. And therefore, when you have the entire Aramaic or Syriac Christians living in the Middle East, being displaced and uprooted physically, I would have this propound this thesis that the rest of the Christians all over the world are uprooted from their own mother tongue, and therefore they are displaced from. Just as the Aramaic or the Syriac Christians in Iraq or Persia or Syria are physically displaced due to war and strife for the last several years, including the present times. We are spiritually an uprooted people because we are displaced from the mother tongue of Asia or Mishnah. And therefore, the kind of theology and spirituality that we have in the post-Enlightenment period, of which Dr. John Motegi had spoken about just 1 hour back, is the result of a positivistic school, one based on Western rationality. And you have so many other faculties in the human being, like what he propounded, about the faculty of love, about the faculty of intuition, the faculty of the heart, etc. And therefore, one of the prime reasons which I would give emphasis, maybe for the last 5-8 years, for giving emphasis on Aramaic or Syriac amongst Christians, not just in Kerala, but all over the world, would be giving a kind of primacy and going back to the roots of Aramaic and Syriac. If you look at the Middle East for the last 2,000 years, you have 3 great Abrahamic religions which has risen from the soils of the Middle East. And if you compare those great religions from the religions from a land like India, I would say that it's a picture of absolute disappointment and absolute failure, because be it the Judaic religion or the Islamic religion or the Christian religion, which has sprouted up from Middle East, you have a series of endless and mindless violence that you have seen for the last 2,000 years. Probably the only exception of infliction of violence, or maybe the minimal kind of infliction of violence would have been from the Aramaic-speaking Christians, for they have been too much of a suffering lot, except maybe for the incidents of the Western Crusaders rushing into the Middle East, or the strife that you have seen in the Lebanon between Christians and Muslims. But by and large, the picture that emerges from the Middle East of the great, and every religion, I would say, should be, as a layman, and not as an expert in language or theology, as a layman, I would say it should be judged by the fruit it has produced. And if you look at the real fruits that these 3 great Abrahamic religions have produced for the Middle East, it's a real picture of sadness and disappointment, especially in the light of what's happening now in Syria, Iraq, and we should not have any partisan perspective about that, certainly as to what is happening in the Israel-Palestinian areas as well. Therefore, if you compare that with the great religions that India has produced, namely the Indian religions of Hinduism, Buddhism and Jainism, you would see you have a lot of strifes and violence in India, like in any part of humanity. But the kind of endless sense that has produced, even after the eclipse of great religions like Buddhism and Jainism, is you don't have genocide of religions, you don't have genocide of communities here. You have most of these religions of even the aboriginal varieties included in the schedule of the Constitution of India. And therefore, I would say, judging by the fruits that it has produced, the great religions of Buddhism, Jainism, and Hinduism, maybe except for the great scars of casteism and the oppressive caste system and the communalism, which you saw was basically a byproduct of the colonial divide and rule in the last century. But for these two great scars, if you make a general comparison as a layman and not as an expert, the perception is one that is quite encouraging, that the great religions of India has been much more fruitful than the three great Abrahamic religions from the Middle East. Therefore, if you want to deconstruct the present theologies and spirituality which has sprouted up from the Middle East, I think one should go back to the roots, and I would certainly agree with the view propounded by Dr. Shabu Taleh, which he had shared with me in private, that there has been only two branches of Christianity. One is the Eastern one, which is the Orient, and the West, which was divided into the Greek and the Latin. And therefore, if you go for a perfect balancing, I think going back to Aramaic and Syriac roots would be of great help to deconstruct the old theologies and to reconstruct a new theology and spirituality of love, which could engender peace and brotherhood and fraternity in not only in Israel and Palestine but in the Middle East and downwards of the world. Because as of now, the dominant culture is one of Christianity, and unless there is great reformation in the Christian theology and culture, world peace may not be achieved at the pace at which we desire. Therefore, one of the prime importance I would give for the future of Syriac and Aramaic studies would be for the deconstruction of the old theologies, especially the theologies and spirituality that has been developed since the post-Enlightenment period. And if you look at the older theologies of the early church and the early church fathers, the Resurrected Fathers, and the post-Enlightenment theologians, I think the perfect balance, proportion and harmony you would find in the theology and spirituality of Saint Ephraim. And therefore, this should be the guiding light to show us some beacon of light, so that this could be of use to the community at large. And for this purpose, I think a human endeavor may not suffice. And let us all pray from the bottom of our hearts that the light of Yeshua Mashiach, the light which the previous speaker spoke, not the material light, the great light of the resurrection of Yeshua, the one of luminosity which is beyond our comprehension, let it spread over the whole of the Middle East and Israel Palestine, so that our old language is sprouted up, leading to a revival of the early times of love and harmony, so that peace and love is entered in the world in the times to come. And this is my short insight about the future of Syriac studies. And I hope this should be of some use to you scholars to think along those lines instead of merely confining to the semantics and linguistics of the language, of a language and its literature. May I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. I'm not an expert to field any questions from any experts, but probably if it is direct to a layman, probably I attempt to answer that if you have the time.
So thank you very much for this slide. I have the last speaker now, Erika Handa. It's not necessary to present her again. She's well known. Please, you have 10 minutes.